thank you all so much for being here. I'm super excited for our panel today. I have some things to say. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Before I do that, I have to introduce our panelists today. Next to me is Justin McLeod. He is the founder of Hinge. I want to let all of you know that he's a Kentucky native, but he went to Colgate in upstate New York. He got his MBA from HBS, which I've heard of. And afterwards, he got a job at McKinsey, never showed up on his first day of work. I also learned Justin is a huge fan of The Bachelor.
Old school Bachelor.
Oh, okay, so you don't know who
I don't know anything
go for.
anymore.
Okay, all right.
Back
I
in
think
like
it's
Trista days and like,
okay.
early.
All right. Well, I don't know anything about that, so maybe we can. David Yarus is the founder of JSwipe. He grew up in Florida, attended St. Albans Christian Preparatory School in DC, where, as I understand, you applied without telling your parents. Is that right?
That is true.
And then you went to Babson College. You founded JSwipe in a gritty Williamsburg warehouse during Passover 2014 I love this, to capitalize on the extra downtime people had while home for the holiday. You're passionate about bringing digital everything to the larger Jewish world. Thank you two for being here today. I want to tell you all right now that the context for why I'm so excited is because I teach a class at CBS called Technology Strategy. A number of students here are in the class are here. Our first case is about Tinder. So my introduction to MBAs about technology is about dating. So you can see where that goes. But also it kind of opens up a lot of possibilities and discussions about what dating can reveal to us about technology and also society. I want both of you to know that in preparation for this session, I downloaded both Hinge and JSwipe on my phone. Well, you know, I also want to let you know that it was really hard to explain to my wife what I was doing. I mean, it was hard enough to explain Hinge, but it's really hard to explain JSwipe because, well, this is weird because my wife is actually Jewish, and so you can imagine the discussion we had about that. That was strange. I want to begin with kind of talking about the dating market, and specifically the way that we kind of talk about this issue in class in terms of the economics of this is that it's a market, when you look at it, is that there's a lot of possibility for differentiation, and what makes it distinct from other markets where there's a lot of potential for differentiation is that there's a lot of natural segmentation, so to speak. There are cultural differences, there are different tastes, and so that's why you have competitors out there like The League or East Meets East or Tall Friends Date, real company, believe it or not. And also you have incumbents like eHarmony. The implication of this is that if you find your niche, then you can be successful and you can capitalize on that niche. You can grow a lot, but at the same time, in order to scale, you have to step out of that niche. The first question I want to ask both of you is, were you ever tempted to step out of the niche that you had grown into a competitive advantage for yourself? If so, what direction would that have been? And if not, what was behind that resistance to scale?
Why don't you start? So we started with the intention of building the technology, building the platform, launching with JSwipe, and then ultimately launching in other verticals, other religions, other maybe interests. And that was the plan until JSwipe just started growing fast and getting very labor intensive and so, I don't know, it's just so all encompassing that we decided just to double down on what was working and go deep.
I see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Hinge started originally as a friends of friends dating app. And so the niche, I guess, was people in your, that you're friends with, which I don't really consider a niche. I mean, I thought that would be something for everyone. And we eventually stepped away from even the friends of friends model because we just found that it, while powerful, that was even a little bit too limiting. And what we really stood for as a company, our tagline is now designed to be deleted, but we really stood for, and the reason that we had the friends of friends was ultimately because we're trying to build a community of intentioned people who are using technology in order to connect more deeply and get offline and not just spend all day on their phones. And so we thought when you connected with your friends or with your friends' friends, you would there was a level of accountability, a level of we're trying to really actually have a relationship here. These are real people on the other side of this technology platform. And so that's, yeah.
What I think is so interesting about what both of you are saying is that you approach kind of how you start a company like this in such a different way from each other. And that's one of the fascinating features, I think, of the kind of online dating app market. So I'm reminded of this really funny thing that I read from Neil Clark Warren, who's actually the founder of eHarmony, CEO, left being CEO and then later came back as CEO when Tinder became huge. And so one thing that he said when asked, aren't you afraid of Tinder? Like, aren't you afraid of Tinder taking over your market? And what he said was like, no, like we're actually complements to Tinder. Why is that the case? Well, it's because you're young, you can use Tinder, and once you get tired of Tinder, you can move on to eHarmony. Or Hinge, or Jason. And so,
just be worried about us.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So one interesting thing that I'd like to hear from both of you is how you kind of see other players in the market. Is it more, is there any type of rivalry, or is it more of a complementary or neutral type of relationship that you have?
I think we almost play a little bit different spaces than that, but for us, when we started, we basically didn't think of anyone as direct competition. Our competition was the stigma around app dating. 5 years ago, there was this idea of like, it was still more acceptable, but it wasn't like fully normalized as it is now, where everyone knows a friend or family member or colleague who's gotten married, through everything really. And it's even though it's an interesting industry where if we're successful, you delete us, right? So it's not like an ongoing deep brand love experience. I also don't think it's a one-sum game. The average user is probably, I don't know, 2, 3, maybe more apps, for their dating experience. So it's, we like everyone together sort of raising the tides of the normalization of the idea that we use technology to make every area of our life easier. So too would or should we use it for one of the most important areas of life, love.
I see. How would you approach this kind of question, Justin, in terms of thinking about other players in the field? So I know that both of you are friends and you respect each other immensely, but in terms of thinking about the entire landscape.
So I think at Hinge, we're not, we definitely, we're carving a space out for ourselves, but I don't think of us as like, how do I put this? I think my bigger issue is like social media addiction. Like I don't have Instagram, I don't have Facebook on my phone. Like I'm like so against all this stuff actually personally. And
you would not be a good Hinge user, it seems.
Well, no, but I would be a good Hinge user, and I think that's the point. Is that I think there's an opportunity for us to be using technology, like I said, to connect more deeply with other people, and not to use it to distract ourselves or numb out or or disconnect. I mean, I think a lot of people can use these platforms to do things that they would never actually do with real people in real life. And so that's the problem that we're really trying to solve, and how I view us as different in the space than I think a lot of these other platforms, which are like fun and gamey, but not really designed to help people connect. They're designed to keep you entertained, they're designed to keep you retained, but they're not there. They're actually not on the side of the user, because most of the time users are coming to these platforms for something else. They're coming there to connect with someone.
I think this is a really interesting issue. One of the things that my students and I are talking about all the time is not only are there economic and value creation and capture implications to starting companies in the app economy, but there are also social implications as well. This is something that many researchers have looked into in terms of the rise of dating apps and whether it's done good or harm to dating as an enterprise. There are many ways to think about this. I think one of the main ways is that it's brought a lot of diversity, and there's research on this to show that with the rise of dating apps, there are more interracial relationships. There are kinds of relationships that were once taboo that probably shouldn't have been taboo, and it's kind of liberated those relationships from in terms of happening. But also, the kind of flip side is that maybe dating app culture has made the quality of relationships worse in some way. So this is kind of a counter to what you're saying initially. I'm wondering how you think of your role in this set of debates about what dating apps have done to our kind of social relationships.
So I think it's super important to recognize the pros and the cons that technology and social and dating apps have brought to our lives. I moved to New York in 2010 to meet for a dream job and to meet a nice Jewish girl. I moved to the Upper West Side because I was told that that's where they all lived. And I did all the things, and maybe after 3-4 years pre-dating apps, like there was maybe 5 people that I actually wanted to go on a date with, and maybe like 3 that I did. Nowadays, we're living in a world where you could be in your pajamas watching Netflix on a Sunday and have access to, singles either in your city or worldwide, depending on how you're swiping or what technology you're using. So access and possibility is incredible and exponentially more, present. That has in turn created a much deeper and maybe more sort of psychological internal issue of the paradox of choice. Now that there's so many options, it makes it, proven much harder to choose, more likely to regret the choice after you make it. And then that with the sort of pop culture of what's called swipe culture or swipe dating, I think it's really just modern, casual, millennial fear of commitment dating. It makes it a really funny and challenging place for the dater. So I think it's most important that we address both sides of that. And that's why one of the things I think in general, the industry is oftentimes talking in the, when we go to these industry conferences about deepening engagement or revenue per user, all these things versus the end game of ultimately love. And I think that's something that both of us share, a passion for, which is we're here to help our communities and, ultimately find the love that they're looking for. And that should be like the true north of every decision we make, every, feature we add, everything we do. So we need more apps that will help you find love, not another date.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and that you have to operationalize that. So for people who are here who are business school people, you're gonna manage towards what you measure as a company. So if at the end, if you're like, Monday commits meeting and your Friday wrap meeting and all that stuff, all you're focused on is like, how did we grow this week? How many sessions did we get? How much time in app? Like if these are the metrics that you're focusing on, your entire organization is gonna start revolving around these things, and that's what you'll optimize for. If you optimize for how many good dates did we send our users on this week per user, then you're gonna optimize your organization around something very, very different. And our bet has always been, and it's taken a longer time, we've been a slower growth story, but now we're starting to speed up a lot, is that we had the belief that as a company, we want to make the long-term bet that if we can be more effective than any other dating app that's out there, people will ultimately come to us in the long term. And so it's been a long journey. I mean, I started this company in 2011, so before Tinder, before Bumble, before any of the stuff. But I think ultimately, like you said, we're really optimizing for love. I mean, we're the only app that actually asks you how your date went. Yeah. Like we're the one following up afterwards to find out whether it was a good date or not a good date. And I'm happy to report that 75% of the time it is. But so yeah, I think that's very true. But you have to build that. You have to build that into your organization.
So I want to follow up with this. I think that's so interesting that you actually follow up with a date. I can't remember the service, but I seem to remember another service out there that allows those who've been on a date to rate each other after the date. You know this, David?
Not exactly. There was something a few years ago where women would be able to rate dudes, like the Wikipedia. That was it ended up closing down. Yeah, or it's not around anymore. But I don't know the mutual rating, and it's a tricky one. But I think they did it really, really, thoughtfully.
I think it's so interesting because when you bring metrics into it, it does change the way that you run a business. I'm curious to hear, however, in terms of actually working towards this goal of love and a deepening relationship, how do you get a sense from users, other than through metrics, that it's working essentially? The other kind of follow-up is, why don't other services do that? It seems like a natural kind of KPI that they would kind of build in. Sorry to use business school stuff, but that's one thing that I think about all the time as well.
Well, these apps seem simple, swipe left, swipe right, like match, but there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into the user experience for any of these apps, as anyone can tell you. And ultimately, it's like, what are you going to put on your product roadmap? You can optimize your paywall, you can optimize how you're going to get people to pay for you, you can optimize your algorithm to get people sucked in. You can optimize how you're going to send them push notifications and at what time. And there's an endless amount of optimization that you can do. And so if at the end of every week and every quarter, you're like, how many more, what's our engagement, what's our growth rate, then you're going to optimize you're going to set your product roadmap very differently than you would if you're like, how many good dates did we get out there? And even to ask that question, you're like, oh my God, wait, I don't even know how many dates we set up because all we're measuring is matches, right? So it's like, it's just, again, you manage towards what you measure.
I'm curious, do you often talk to your users? I'm sure you do. And what are the things that you look for in terms of learnings?
So we stay really close. We have monthly focus groups, more informal gatherings where we have conversations about whatever either is our priority for that month or whatever surfaces. We have events in our key cities where they're shockingly not awkward singles events, but they're actually really fun, like get-togethers. Someone on my team, Steph, and I are actually, let's call it community managers default in the app. So I'm just always perusing and getting feedback and questions and comments and critiques. So we stay close, we love it. And then also it's interesting because we don't always know if we're successful, right? Like we don't know if you found love. Not 100% of our success stories will reach out to us. So it's an interesting dynamic, but we just launched this week something that has been requested for a while, for a few years wasn't possible, but finally is now doable, which is basically success stories for their engagement or for their wedding would ask for their chat history, like their awkward, funny first conversations. And we used, for a while, we didn't give it out. Then we gave them like Excel spreadsheet, like exports. And now we like do this cool, beautiful visual mock-up. And in launching that, we've had a whole wave of new users like sort of responding and requesting their stories to share. So we just keep our ears, and eyes open. And we always invite and request, dialogue with our people.
I want to be sensitive to time because a lot of the audience members here I know have questions. So I only have one more question for you, which is, number one, are you currently in relationships? And number two, how did you meet your partners? And number three, have you ever used your own apps to do so?
You first.
No, you
more
first.
Fun story. His story is great, so I'll save some time so he can tell it. I don't know. In short, I would say that when Facebook originally launched, like early on, and they had the relationship status, and it was like single, in a relationship, it's complicated. At first, I was like, why does that button exist? Who would ever? And I'm like, yeah, the answer to your question is like, it's complicated, So that's the answer. Do I ever use it? Sure, I prefer to use other apps than JSwipe, just to not mix business and pleasure. Bumble, Hinge is by far one of my favorite, based on like the intentional way that they've, added thoughtfulness to the quote swiping experience, but more just sort of expressing interest experience. And my primary use on JSwipe is in a community manager mode. So fielding questions and answers and helping people find love.
Justin?
Well, I met Kate, who's my wife, in 2003. So I was 19 years old. Wow. So yeah, it was a while ago. It's a long story, but basically we broke up at the end of college. She transferred to Wellesley to get away from me, and then we didn't speak for 4 years, and then I reached out to her, and she was living in London with another guy, and I was always convinced Kate and I were getting it up together, and she was like, sorry, it's too late, and I was heartbroken, and I just stayed in my room for a week and cried, and then I started Hinge the next week, and yeah, I could tell.
I'm glad you channeled your energy.
Yeah, and then fast forward another 3 years, I've moved the company up to New York, and I would write Kate a letter every year on her birthday, and she never responded to me, and I was becoming a little stalkerish probably. But so then this reporter from the New York Times, this reporter from the New York Times reaches out to me and is like, I want to write a story on you because I met my person on Hinge, and this is the early days of Hinge still, 2014 or 15, and she had matched and fallen in love with the first person who showed up on the app. And so she asked me if I'd ever been in love at the end of the interview. And I'm like, well, a long time ago, there's this girl, but it's too late. I didn't recognize it until it's too late. And she's like, I have a story to tell you. And she tells me the story of her long lost relationship. And she's like, you have to fly over to Switzerland. This is where Kate lived now. You have to fly over there. You have to get her back. And so I did, and I flew over a month before she was supposed to get married to this other guy. It's it was a thing.
Well, I think that's about it. I think we can open it up to audience questions. So if anyone's got anything to ask our two panelists, please step up. We got mics going around.
So I love this. This is really great. But I actually work with people, and I've studied some of the apps. I teach a class I call Dating in a New World. So recently was doing some research, and I read that there are new algorithms that are helping both with facial recognition to help match people that look alike, and also with the algorithm of how to make people, for you folks to match them up better through the technology. Has that really been effective, and do you guys use any of that? Do your apps?
That's a great question. I think a lot about this stuff. So there's sort of two pieces of the way that the Hinge algorithm works. So the first part of it is we use machine learning to learn your taste. And that's actually a relatively easy problem to solve with like a standard out-of-the-box machine learning tool. Like you can basically look at someone's like and past history and who they commented on, who they got in a conversation with, like feed that into a thing, and then we can basically rank order every single person on Hinge from your most likely to like them all the way down to your least likely to like them. So that's actually not the problem. The problem is how do you match people up with someone who's like gonna like them back? And yeah. So what we do, I don't know if you've seen Hang the DJ on Black Mirror, but we kind of run a really rudimentary version of that where we use this thing called the Gale Shapley algorithm. It's sort of derived spiritually from this, but it's the stable marriage problem. We're really trying to figure out, like, if everyone on this app like dated everyone, like where would you sort of like end up in the end based on everyone's individual preferences? Then we try to like show you people in that neighborhood, if that makes any sense.
So first of all, it's fascinating. For us, it's more about, we have a smaller pool of people that are swiping through, especially, New York is our strongest market, and our, major cities are great, but in some of our smaller cities. So for us, it's how do we use algorithms and also maybe just user experience design to help you, if you swipe through your pool in your, smaller city, show you people that you would be interested in that are maybe around the world or close to you, but not in your, in your specific filter set. So that's where we've been focusing that effort. But we found that because in the JSwipe experience, people are going there to find someone specifically Jewish, that they're more likely to be open to considering people or places outside of their initial intentions.
Yeah.
I could just shout.
Yeah, just shout it out. Yeah.
So I just have a question. So JSwipe's a relatively niche market, right? There's 18 million Jews in the world. You could probably get to a pretty limited TAM in the hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. So how do you think about that, the implications on your revenue compared to, say, Hinge, which could be more mass market and have a potentially larger total addressable market?
It's interesting. I had 3 sort of business partners when we were starting this, and I was always the dreamer, idealist, like in it for the love and like the journey and the experience. So I don't really think about that. Like, there's a lot of Jewish people in the world, and I want to get all of them as, the big love that they're looking for, or as many of them as possible. That's the sort of my lens on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Walmarts of the world and the corner stores of the world, and both of them can be profitable. It just depends upon what your ambitions are as a company. But you're certainly not going to become you're not going to build a $1 billion company chasing like a tiny little niche market. But it's fun.
Sure. So I love that your end goal is love, but just going back to the social implications of the apps themselves, it's made dating easier, which we all appreciate, like swiping in our pajamas. But at the same time, it's created like a lazier option, and I feel like men will always just take that lazier option. So you've kind of like created a new problem. So what are your thoughts on how to like fix that?
Created a new problem.
Oh yeah.
Want to take it?
Well. So I do. So I think about this. I think about this a lot, and that's the reason we changed Hinge as much as we did. We got rid of the swiping mechanism a few years ago because it is like on any of these swiping apps, including the feminist one. The dominant strategy for men is just to is just to swipe right on everyone and then see who matches with you later. It creates a huge amount of noise in the system, which is, by the way, why you find that the people aren't as good on those apps because there's no signal. There's how do you get signal when you put very little information up there and people are swiping right on 70% of the people? Like, I have no idea who you like if that's the way that you're acting on the app. And so the way that we change that is we ask people to put more effort in, and it's a gating factor. You actually have to put an effort to join Hinge. You have to fill out comments. I mean, you have to fill out these prompts. And then in order to like someone, you have to choose something to like, and then ideally add a comment as well, which, and you only get 10 likes a day, so you have to be thoughtful about that too. But even if you didn't have 10 likes a day, most people, that additional overhead reduces drastically people's willingness to like, and so you get much more thoughtful, much more intentioned behavior. You get better signal, and you avoid hopefully the lazy thing, because ultimately people are going to choose. If you're lazy, you're going to choose the laziest option. And so we only have to be like a little bit less lazy than the laziest option in order to basically like not have any of those people on our platform. Because if all you're trying to do is hook up, like Hinge is way too much work. Like you should definitely download something where you can just swipe and be like, hey, what's up? And because Hinge is way too hard, honestly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think for us, we think about more than optimizing for like deeper, engagement or more users. It's how do we get people talking more? How do we drive more engagement within the app? How do we get more people off the app on dates? And we spend our time and energy like building that out. I think Hinge really, I believe, led the way in disrupting the swipe experience to make it more intentional. And now everyone else who isn't, doing anything other than just swipe back and forth, it allows for the lighter touch experience that you're looking for. I don't necessarily consider it lazy as much as maybe efficiency. Like personally, I prefer meeting someone who I already know. If I'm gonna take time, go somewhere, meet someone and spend time on a weekday, weekend, whatever. I like the comfort in knowing that there's even a baseline of mutual interest, rather than the unknown or the questioning. I hate that. So I prefer technology to get there, and then I think like anything, it's a tool that is, depending on who's wielding that tool, it will determine whether they're lazy or they're, a little more intentional or thoughtful.
Sure.
Sure. So have you guys thought about, I know some of the bigger incumbents like eHarmony and OkCupid use a percentile match. Have you guys thought about incorporating that, or is that more like a behind the scenes numbers you use to match people up?
Obviously we're really thoughtful about who we pair you up with, but we don't, we haven't found that that's a useful thing for people to see or use. I mean, what's that really? We just haven't heard it's something that people value, and like 89, 91, 93. I mean, ideally everyone we show you is someone who's very relevant for you, so giving you a random number to talk about doesn't really, we just haven't found it. Our platform's more organic, not mathy.
Yeah. For us, we same. And if we think about displaying anything, what I'm thinking about now is how do we take away the guessing or making you the second guessing yourself if someone doesn't respond, if in fact they're just not a responsive person, right? If they haven't been active in 2 weeks, but you're sitting there being what's wrong with me? All these things that we don't want you to be thinking. Somehow making that more visible, in a thoughtful way would be interesting, but.
I'll give another just point here is that what we really do think a lot about is not so much interpersonal chemistry, because ultimately we only have so much information about you, and we don't know how you're gonna like each other's smell, or but what we are good at and we do think a lot about is how you foster deeper interaction so that people can get offline and discover something more deeply. So for example, these prompts that you see in Hinge, for those of you that use Hinge, there's these little short questions that have answers to them. We're tracking maniacally which of those questions lead to phone numbers exchanged, which of them don't, which of those questions are willing to be answered, and which of them aren't. So we sort of have this efficiency frontier of some questions that are really easy to answer and a lot of people like to answer lead to no conversation, no phone numbers exchanged, Go To Karaoke Song, for example. And then we have other ones that really lead to great conversation and help you get offline. I think the best one right now is what I'm looking for in a +1 wedding date. And so we think a lot about how to optimize that piece of it.
So you take that and then help I'm a user that doesn't understand technology at all, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah. So what we're always doing is we're getting rid of the bad questions that aren't going to lead, and we're learning the patterns of what works, and then we're adding more of those. And we'll probably change pretty soon to even add little badges, because sometimes the ones that do the best are people don't want to answer because it's maybe hard or makes you be a little bit vulnerable, which is the whole like key to, by the way, if you're looking to date, like be vulnerable. That's the trick. Yeah. So we'd like to do like bad, when you're selecting it, we'd be like, hey, choose this one. We know it requires a little bit more effort, but it's going to be more likely to actually get you off on a great date.
David, Justin, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you very much for your questions.